When I was diagnosed with a heart condition at 70 and needed her support the most, my daughter Rachel decided I was too much of a burden and started hiding my medication, hoping I'd just fade away quietly. That was the moment I realized the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her inheritance. But what Rachel didn't know was that I'd been quietly building a fortune she never suspected, and this time I was going to make sure she learned that betraying the woman who gave her everything would cost her more than she could ever imagine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Thompson. I'm 70 years old, and I'm about to tell you how my own daughter, a respected cardiologist, mind you, tried to slowly murder me for money she assumed was rightfully hers. But here's what she didn't count on. I may be old, and I may walk with a cane now, but I'm far from helpless, and I've been planning my response longer than she's been planning my demise. Let me paint you a picture of who Rachel is, because understanding her character is crucial to this story. Dr. Rachel Thompson Whitmore is 47 years old, drives a BMW, lives in a gated community called Millbrook Estates, and has spent the last 20 years building what she calls a prestigious cardiology practice in downtown Seattle. She's the kind of woman who introduces herself at parties by mentioning she went to Johns Hopkins, then casually drops how much her house is worth into the conversation. She wears designer suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, gets her nails done twice a week, and hasn't cooked a meal for herself since medical school. To the outside world, Rachel is successful, accomplished, and devoted to her patients. She volunteers at charity galas, posts inspirational quotes about healing on her social media, and has a gleaming reputation in Seattle's medical community. But I know the real Rachel, the one who calculates the cost-benefit of every relationship, who sees people as either useful or burdensome, and who learned early in life that appearing caring was far more valuable than actually being caring. You see, Rachel has always assumed that because I live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Belltown, drive a 15-year-old Toyota Camry with a dent in the passenger door, and shop at Walmart instead of Whole Foods, that I must be barely surviving on Social Security and whatever small savings I managed to scrape together from my little bookkeeping job. She's watched me clip coupons for years, seen me buy generic brands, observed me mending clothes instead of buying new ones, and concluded that her poor, financially struggling mother was entirely dependent on her generosity and would eventually need her support. What Rachel doesn't know, what she's never bothered to ask about or investigate, is that my little bookkeeping job has been anything but little. For 32 years, I've worked for Henderson & Associates, starting as a part-time bookkeeper when Rachel was in high school. What began as entering numbers into ledgers 3 days a week gradually became managing the books for 12 small businesses, then 15, then 23. Over the decades, I became indispensable to Harrison Henderson, the founder, who valued my discretion, my accuracy, and my absolute reliability. When Harrison's health began failing 8 years ago, he made me an offer that changed everything. He wanted to sell me a partnership in the firm. Not because he felt sorry for me, but because I'd been essentially running the business operations for years while he focused on client relationships. The numbers don't lie, and I'd been the one keeping track of them. Harrison respected that I'd never missed a day of work, never made an error that wasn't immediately corrected, and never gossiped about our clients' financial situations, even when some of those situations were quite scandalous. I used every penny of my savings, took out a loan against my modest apartment, and bought a 35% stake in Henderson & Associates. What Rachel saw as her mother working a little part-time job was actually me building equity in a firm that handled accounting for some of Seattle's most successful small businesses, tech startups, and even a few minor celebrities who preferred discreet financial management over the big corporate firms. The beauty of it was that I never changed my lifestyle. I kept living in the same apartment, kept driving the same car, kept shopping at the same stores. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd learned early in life that flashing wealth makes you a target, and I preferred the security of being underestimated. While Rachel was buying her BMW and her designer handbags, I was quietly accumulating assets she couldn't even imagine. By the time Harrison decided to retire completely last year, Henderson & Associates was bringing in over $2 million annually, and my 35% stake had grown to be worth considerably more than Rachel's house, her car, and her medical practice combined. When Harrison offered to sell me his remaining shares for a price that was essentially a gift between friends, I didn't hesitate. At 70 years old, I became the sole owner of a thriving accounting firm, with net assets worth just over $4.2 million. But to Rachel, I was still just mom. Poor, aging, increasingly burdensome mom who would eventually need financial support and would leave her modest savings and small apartment to her only child. She's never asked about my work, never inquired about my finances, never wondered how I managed to always have enough money for her birthday gifts, her children's Christmas presents, and the occasional family dinner at expensive restaurants she chose. Rachel's assumption about my financial situation wasn't just ignorance, it was willful blindness. She preferred to see me as financially dependent, because it fit the narrative she'd constructed about our relationship. In her mind, she was the successful one, the accomplished one, the one who'd made something of herself, while I was just the aging mother who'd served my purpose and was now slowly becoming a liability. This brings me to the living situation that set the stage for everything that followed. 3 months ago, when my heart condition was diagnosed, my cardiologist, not Rachel, but Dr. Patricia Chen at Swedish Medical Center, explained that I would need to take my medications exactly as prescribed and monitor my symptoms carefully. The condition was serious, but manageable with the right treatment. I would need metoprolol twice daily for blood pressure regulation, atorvastatin for cholesterol management, and most critically, warfarin for blood thinning to prevent the clots that could trigger a massive heart attack. Dr. Chen was very clear about the warfarin. Missing doses could be fatal. The medication had to be taken at the same time every day, and skipping even a single dose could result in blood clots forming within hours. She stressed that this wasn't a medication you could be casual about. It was literally a matter of life and death. When I told Rachel about the diagnosis, her initial response seemed appropriately concerned. She insisted I move in with her temporarily, just until we could figure out the best long-term care plan. Her house in Millbrook Estates had a guest suite with its own bathroom, and she argued it would be safer for me to be there where she could monitor my condition and help manage my medications. At the time, I thought this was genuine concern. I was touched that my daughter wanted to take care of me, that she was willing to disrupt her perfectly ordered life to accommodate her aging mother. I packed a suitcase, gathered my medications, and moved into Rachel's guest suite, grateful to have a daughter who cared enough to put my health first. For the first 2 weeks, everything seemed normal. Rachel would check on me in the mornings before leaving for work, ask about my symptoms, and remind me to take my medications on schedule. She even organized my pills into one of those weekly dispensers with compartments for morning and evening doses. I thought she was being wonderfully attentive. But then I started noticing small things. My evening warfarin dose, which should have been in the Monday evening compartment, wasn't there one night. When I asked Rachel about it, she claimed I must have taken it and forgotten. The next week, my Tuesday morning metoprolol was missing. Again, Rachel suggested I was becoming forgetful, and had probably taken it without remembering. The thing is, I'm 70, not 90, and my mind is as sharp as it's ever been. I've been managing complex financial records for 3 decades. I don't forget important details. When you're handling other people's money, you develop systems, you double-check everything, and you notice when things are out of place. I knew I hadn't taken those missing pills. When you know. I started paying closer attention. I began taking photos of my pill organizer each morning and evening with my phone, documenting exactly what was there before I took my scheduled doses. Within a week, I had clear evidence that someone was removing pills from my organizer after I'd gone to bed. The missing medications weren't random. It was specifically the warfarin. The blood thinner that Dr. Chen had emphasized was absolutely critical. The medication that could mean the difference between a long, healthy life and a sudden, fatal heart attack. That's when the horrible truth began to dawn on me. My daughter wasn't helping me manage my medications. She was sabotaging them. She was deliberately removing the pills that kept me alive, hoping that I would suffer a natural heart attack that could be attributed to my age and medical condition. To test my theory, I tried a simple experiment. On Sunday night, I marked one of my warfarin tablets with a tiny dot of nail polish before placing it in Monday evening's compartment. Monday night, the marked pill was gone, But there was a different, unmarked pill in its place, probably an old pill from a previous prescription, or possibly just a similar-looking medication from her medical samples. Rachel wasn't just removing my medication, she was replacing it with something harmless to avoid suspicion. She wanted it to look like I was taking my pills regularly while actually receiving none of the life-saving blood-thinning effects. As this realization sank in, I felt a coldness I'd never experienced before. This wasn't neglect or misunderstanding. This was premeditated murder. My own daughter, a doctor who had sworn an oath to, first, do no harm, was systematically trying to kill me. But why? The answer was obvious once I thought about it. Rachel believed I had maybe $50,000 in savings and would leave her my apartment, which was worth perhaps another $150,000 in Seattle's inflated market. In her mind, she was looking at an inheritance of maybe $200,000, which was nice but not life-changing for someone with her income. What Rachel didn't realize was that she was committing murder for an inheritance that didn't even exist, at least not the way she imagined it. Because while she was busy removing my pills and planning my funeral, I was busy planning something else entirely. You see, I'd been thinking about updating my will for months, ever since I'd become the sole owner of Henderson & Associates. My old will, written 15 years ago, left everything to Rachel because she was my only child and I loved her. But that was when everything meant a modest apartment and small savings account. Now everything meant a multi-million-dollar business, investment accounts, and real estate holdings that Rachel knew nothing about. And watching her calmly attempt to murder me for what she thought was pocket change made me realize that my daughter had become someone I no longer recognized. Someone who definitely didn't deserve to inherit anything I'd worked so hard to build. The irony was almost funny. If it wasn't so chilling, Rachel was risking a murder charge to steal an inheritance worth maybe $200,000, while unknowingly forfeiting an actual inheritance worth more than 20 times that amount. But I didn't call the police immediately. I didn't confront her directly. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do over 3 decades in business. I gathered evidence, I made a plan, and I prepared to execute it flawlessly. Because if Rachel wanted to play games with life and death, she was about to learn that her mother had been playing a much longer, much more sophisticated game than she'd ever imagined. And the stakes were about to get a lot higher than she'd bargained for. To understand how my daughter Rachel became capable of attempted murder, you need to understand our history together. The 47 years of sacrifice, devotion, and unconditional love that led to this moment of ultimate betrayal. Because what made her actions so devastating wasn't just their cruelty, but the fact that they came from someone I had given everything to create, nurture, and support. Rachel Elizabeth Thompson was born on March 15, 1977, during one of the worst snowstorms Seattle had seen in decades. I was 23 years old, unmarried, and absolutely terrified. Her father, Michael Whitmore, was a medical student at the University of Washington who disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant. He transferred to a residency program in California and made it very clear that he wanted nothing to do with either of us. I never heard from him again, never received a penny of child support, and never even told Rachel his name until she turned 18 and demanded to know. From the moment Rachel took her first breath, it was just the two of us against the world. I was working as a waitress at a diner called Mel's Kitchen on Capitol Hill, pulling double shifts and living in a studio apartment that was barely big enough for a crib. I remember those early days so clearly. The exhaustion, the constant worry about money, the determination to give my daughter everything I'd never had. My own childhood had been difficult. My parents died in a car accident when I was 17, leaving me with nothing but a pile of medical bills and a broken-down house that had to be sold to pay their debts. I aged out of the foster system at 18 with $200, a high school diploma, and an absolute determination that my daughter would never experience the insecurity and abandonment that had defined my early life. So I worked. God, how I worked. During Rachel's first 5 years, I held down 3 jobs simultaneously. I waitressed at Mel's Kitchen during the day, cleaned office buildings at night, and did freelance bookkeeping on weekends for small businesses that couldn't afford a professional accountant. I would drop Rachel off at a neighborhood daycare at 7 in the morning, work until 6, pick her up, feed her dinner, put her to bed, then head out to clean offices until midnight. On Saturdays and Sundays, while she napped or played quietly, I would spread accounting ledgers across our tiny kitchen table and reconcile books for auto repair shops, small restaurants, and family-owned retail stores. I was making barely enough to cover rent, daycare, groceries, and Rachel's clothes, which she seemed to outgrow every 3 months. I lived on instant ramen and peanut butter sandwiches so that she could have fresh fruit, milk, and vegetables. I wore the same 3 thrift store outfits for years while making sure she always had clothes that fit properly and looked nice for school. When Rachel turned 5 and started kindergarten, I had my first real breakthrough. Mrs. Gonzalez, who owned the daycare Rachel attended, mentioned that her brother-in-law, Harrison Henderson, was looking for someone to help with bookkeeping for his small accounting firm. He needed someone reliable who could work part-time hours that would fit around a school schedule. The pay was better than anything I'd been making, and it would allow me to drop the night cleaning job. I'll never forget my interview with Harrison. I was so nervous I showed up 20 minutes early and sat in my car practicing what I would say. When I finally walked into his office, a modest space above a pharmacy in the University District, Harrison was a kind-faced man in his early 50s who immediately put me at ease. He didn't care that I didn't have a college degree or formal accounting training. He cared that I was accurate, dependable, and desperately needed the work. "Eleanor," he said after looking through the sample ledgers I'd brought from my freelance work, "you have a natural talent for this. These books are cleaner and more organized than work I've seen from people with accounting degrees." That part-time job became my lifeline. For the first time since Rachel was born, I had a steady income, reasonable hours, and work that I genuinely enjoyed. Harrison was patient and generous with his knowledge, teaching me proper accounting procedures, tax preparation, and business management. Within 2 years, I was handling the books for most of his smaller clients, and he was paying me enough that I could quit waitressing and focus on raising Rachel. Those were some of our best years together. Rachel was a bright, curious child who loved school and excelled at everything she tried. I was finally able to be the kind of mother I'd always wanted to be. Present for school events, available to help with homework, able to read bedtime stories instead of rushing off to a second job. I remember when Rachel was 7, she announced that she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. "Like the ones who help people feel better," she said, playing with her toy stethoscope. I was so proud of her ambition, and I promised her that no matter what it took, I would make sure she could achieve that dream. That promise shaped every decision I made for the next 15 years. When Rachel was in 3rd grade, I realized that our neighborhood elementary school wasn't challenging her enough. She was reading at a high school level and finishing her math homework in minutes. I researched private schools and found Lakeside Academy, a prestigious preparatory school that sent most of its graduates to Ivy League universities. The tuition was $12,000 a year, more than I was making at the time, but I was determined to find a way. I took on additional freelance bookkeeping clients, working evenings and weekends, while Rachel did homework or played at friends' houses. I applied for every scholarship and financial aid program Lakeside offered. I wrote letters explaining our situation, provided financial documentation, and even had Rachel write an essay about her goals and dreams. When the acceptance letter came with a partial scholarship covering 60% of the tuition, I cried with relief and terror. Even with the scholarship, I would need to come up with nearly $5,000 a year, plus books, uniforms, and activity fees. It meant living even more frugally than we already were, but I didn't hesitate. For the next 9 years, from 3rd grade through high school graduation, I sacrificed everything to keep Rachel at Lakeside. I bought my clothes exclusively from thrift stores and garage sales. I drove a succession of used cars that were always on the verge of breaking down. We never went on vacations, never ate at restaurants, never bought anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. But Rachel thrived. She was consistently on the honor roll, participated in debate team and science club, and developed friendships with children from Seattle's wealthiest families. She was invited to birthday parties at houses in Bellevue and Mercer Island that were bigger than entire apartment buildings. She went on school trips to Europe and science camps at Stanford University. She had opportunities I could never have imagined as a child. The sacrifice was worth it when she graduated as valedictorian, and received a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins University for pre-med studies. The day she walked across that stage, I felt like every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every secondhand coat had been vindicated. But somewhere during those high school years, something began to change in Rachel. The girl who used to thank me for every sacrifice began to take them for granted. She started making comments about how embarrassing it was that I drove such an old car when I picked her up from school. She would complain that her friends' mothers had real careers and could afford to shop at Nordstrom instead of thrift stores. When she was 16, she asked me why I couldn't just get a better job so we could live in a nicer apartment like her friends. When I explained that my work at Henderson & Associates was meaningful and well-paying for what it was, she rolled her eyes and said, "Mom, you're a bookkeeper. That's not exactly a career." I told myself it was normal teenage behavior, that she was just trying to fit in with her wealthy classmates. I convinced myself that once she matured, she would understand and appreciate what we'd accomplished together. During her years at Johns Hopkins, I continued supporting her financially, even though she had a full academic scholarship. She needed money for textbooks, lab fees, living expenses, and all the social activities that were part of college life. I sent her $800 a month, money I could barely afford, but that I considered an investment in her future. She called every Sunday during her freshman year, sharing stories about her classes, her roommate, and her plans for medical school. I lived for those phone calls. But as the years progressed, the calls became shorter and less frequent. She was busy with studies, internships, and social commitments. When she did call, it was usually because she needed something: money for a school trip, funding for summer courses, or help with an unexpected expense. When she was accepted to medical school at Johns Hopkins for another 4 years, I was proud but also terrified. Medical school tuition was enormous, even with her academic scholarships and financial aid. I would need to contribute at least $15,000 a year to cover her remaining expenses. That's when I made one of the biggest decisions of my life. I sold the small apartment I'd finally managed to buy and moved into a cheaper rental so I could access the equity. I used that money, plus loans against my growing equity in Henderson & Associates, to ensure Rachel could complete medical school without drowning in debt. During her medical school years, our relationship became increasingly transactional. She would call when she needed money, send brief text messages on holidays, and visit Seattle maybe twice a year. When she did visit, she seemed impatient with my modest lifestyle and would make subtle comments about how I needed to improve my situation and plan better for retirement. After medical school, Rachel matched for her residency at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. She was thrilled. It was one of the most prestigious cardiology programs in the country. I was proud but heartbroken that she would be living across the country, even further from the close relationship we'd once shared. During her residency, she met Jonathan Whitmore, a wealthy investment banker whose family owned property throughout New England. They moved in together after 6 months, and suddenly Rachel's lifestyle improved dramatically. She was living in a luxury apartment in Back Bay, wearing designer clothes, and traveling to Europe for vacations. When she called to tell me they were engaged, I was happy for her but also hurt that I was hearing about it over the phone rather than in person. When she mentioned that the wedding would be held at Jonathan's family estate in Newport, Rhode Island, and that the guest list would be relatively small, just close family and friends, I assumed I would be involved in the planning. I was wrong. Rachel's wedding was planned entirely by Jonathan's mother and a professional wedding coordinator. My input was neither requested nor welcome. I was given a date, a time, and instructions about what to wear. The wedding cost more than I had ever made in a single year, and I felt completely out of place among Jonathan's wealthy relatives and Rachel's medical school friends. During the reception, I overheard one of Jonathan's cousins asking Rachel about her mother's people. Rachel's response was, "Oh, my mother's family isn't really around anymore. She's just a working-class woman from Seattle. Sweet, but limited opportunities." That was the moment I realized that in Rachel's new world, I wasn't a source of pride or gratitude. I was an embarrassment to be managed and minimized. After the wedding, Rachel moved to Seattle when Jonathan's firm transferred him to manage their Pacific Northwest investments. They bought a house in Millbrook Estates, had 2 children, Emma and James, and settled into an upper-class lifestyle that seemed effortless and natural to Rachel. When the children were born, I hoped that becoming a mother might help Rachel understand and appreciate the sacrifices I had made for her. I offered to help with childcare, to babysit whenever they needed me, to be the kind of involved grandmother I'd never had the chance to be as a child. But Rachel's approach to motherhood was very different from mine. She hired a full-time nanny from an agency that specialized in, quote, highly educated childcare professionals. She enrolled the children in elite preschools and organized their lives around structured activities and educational opportunities. My offers to help were politely declined because, as Rachel explained, the children need consistency and professional-level care. I was allowed to visit on scheduled occasions, birthday parties, holidays, school performances, but always as a guest rather than as an integral part of the family. The children were polite to me but distant, clearly coached on how to interact with Grandma Eleanor during our brief supervised visits. Meanwhile, Jonathan's parents were deeply involved in their grandchildren's lives. They funded the children's private school tuition, took them on elaborate vacations, and were consulted on every major decision about their upbringing. They lived in a sprawling estate in Bellevue and hosted regular family gatherings that included cousins, aunts, uncles, and close family friends. I was never invited to these gatherings. When I asked Rachel about this, she explained that Jonathan's family has their own traditions, and it would be awkward to mix different social circles. Over the years, I watched my daughter transform from the bright, grateful child I had raised into someone I barely recognized. She developed an obsession with status symbols, the right cars, the right neighborhood, the right social connections. She spoke differently, dressed differently, and seemed to have completely reinvented her personal history. When people asked about her background, she would mention that she grew up in Seattle but never talked about our struggles, my sacrifices, or the years we spent living paycheck to paycheck so she could attend private school. She had created a narrative where her success was entirely self-made, the result of her own intelligence and hard work, rather than decades of someone else's sacrifice. The final transformation came when Rachel completed her cardiology fellowship and opened her own practice. She had joined a prestigious medical group, was making excellent money, and was building a reputation as one of Seattle's rising stars in cardiac medicine. That's when she began making comments about my retirement planning and my financial security. She would ask probing questions about my savings, my work situation, and my long-term care plans. At first, I thought she was being thoughtful, planning ahead to make sure I would be taken care of as I aged. But her questions had an edge of concern that seemed more about her own future obligations than my well-being. She would say things like, "Mom, you really need to think about what happens when you can't work anymore, and I hope you're putting money aside because I won't be able to support you financially." These conversations always made me uncomfortable, but I tried to reassure her that I was fine, that I had been careful with money, and that she shouldn't worry about taking care of me. I never mentioned my growing equity in Henderson & Associates or the investment accounts I had been building. I preferred to let her think I was financially modest but stable rather than revealing the extent of my business success. Looking back now, I realize that Rachel's questions weren't motivated by love or concern. She was calculating. She was trying to determine how much of a financial burden I might become and planning accordingly. When Jonathan left her 2 years ago, apparently for a younger woman he met through his investment firm, Rachel's financial situation changed dramatically. The divorce settlement was substantial, but it wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. She kept the house, but had to take on a mortgage. She kept her medical practice, but had to buy out Jonathan's investment in the building. She maintained custody of the children, but lost access to the Whitmore family wealth that had supplemented their lifestyle for years. For the first time since medical school, Rachel was financially stressed. Not poor. She was still making excellent money as a cardiologist, but no longer wealthy enough to live without thinking about expenses. That's when her attitude toward me began to shift from distant politeness to calculating interest. She started asking more specific questions about my estate planning and my end-of-life wishes. She would bring up news stories about elderly people who had died without proper wills or whose families had fought over inheritances. She even suggested several times that I should move in with her after my heart diagnosis. "It just makes sense, Mom," she would say. You shouldn't be living alone with a serious medical condition, and I'm a cardiologist. Who better to monitor your health? At the time, I thought this was genuine concern, mixed with practical thinking. I was touched that my daughter wanted to take care of me after years of keeping me at arm's length. Now I understand that Rachel wasn't planning to take care of me. She was planning to take control of me. She had calculated that I probably had around $200,000 in assets, my apartment, my savings, and maybe a small life insurance policy. In her mind, that was her inheritance, money that would help offset the financial stress of her divorce and single motherhood. But Rachel's timeline was too long for her comfort. I was 70 and in relatively good health aside from the heart condition. With proper medical care, I could easily live another 15 or 20 years. That was too long for someone who needed money now to maintain her lifestyle and fund her children's expensive private school educations. So she decided to expedite the process. What Rachel didn't realize, what she couldn't have imagined, was that the modest, frugal mother she had learned to see as a financial burden was actually wealthier than she was. That the little bookkeeping job she had dismissed for decades had made me a multimillionaire. That her attempts to murder me for a modest inheritance were actually forfeiting a fortune beyond her dreams. But more than that, Rachel didn't understand that the woman who had outworked, outsmarted, and outmaneuvered poverty, abandonment, and single motherhood for 47 years wasn't going to be outmaneuvered by her own daughter. She had taught me through years of disappointment and emotional distance that love without respect is worthless. And she was about to learn that underestimating someone who has spent decades building something from nothing is a very dangerous mistake. The little girl I had sacrificed everything to create had become someone willing to kill the woman who gave her life. But the woman she was trying to kill had become someone with the power to destroy everything she thought she was entitled to. And I was just getting started. The heart attack that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in October, while I was sitting at my desk at Henderson & Associates, reviewing quarterly reports for our tech startup clients. It was 9:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was looking at the clock on my computer screen when the pain started. At first, it felt like indigestion. A burning sensation in my chest that I attributed to the strong coffee I'd been drinking all morning. We were in the middle of tax preparation season, and I'd been putting in 12-hour days for weeks, surviving on caffeine and determination. I rubbed my chest absently and continued working, thinking the discomfort would pass. But instead of fading, the pain intensified and began radiating down my left arm. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I'd read enough medical articles and watched enough health documentaries to recognize the classic symptoms of a heart attack. The crushing pressure in my chest, the shooting pain down my arm, the sudden difficulty breathing. This wasn't indigestion. I managed to dial 911 before the pain became so severe that I couldn't speak clearly. The dispatcher stayed on the line while I struggled to give her the office address and describe my symptoms. I remember her calm, professional voice, asking me to unlock the front door if possible, and then lie down on the floor until the paramedics arrived. Those 15 minutes waiting for the ambulance were the longest of my life. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, a crushing weight on my chest that made every breath a struggle. But worse than the physical pain was the fear. Not fear of dying exactly, but fear of leaving so much unfinished. Fear that all the work I'd done, all the success I'd quietly built, might be discovered and exploited by people who didn't understand or appreciate what it represented. The paramedics were incredibly professional and efficient. They had me stabilized and in the ambulance within minutes, starting an IV and giving me medication to help with the pain and blood clotting. During the ride to Swedish Medical Center, I remember thinking about Rachel and wondering if I should call her. But the rational part of my mind reminded me that she was probably in surgery or with patients, and there was nothing she could do from across town anyway. At the hospital, everything moved very quickly. I was rushed into the emergency department, where a team of doctors and nurses immediately began running tests, blood work, EKG, chest x-rays, and a series of other procedures I didn't fully understand. The emergency room physician, Dr. Martinez, explained that I was having what appeared to be a moderate heart attack, and that they needed to determine the extent of the damage and the best course of treatment. Within an hour, I was in the cardiac catheterization lab, where Dr. Patricia Chen, the cardiologist who would become my primary physician, performed an angioplasty to open the blocked artery that had caused the heart attack. Dr. Chen was a slight woman in her 50s, with graying hair and an incredibly calm, reassuring presence. She explained everything as she worked, describing how the procedure would restore blood flow to my heart and prevent further damage. The angioplasty was successful, but Dr. Chen explained that this was just the beginning of my treatment. The heart attack had revealed underlying coronary artery disease that would require ongoing management for the rest of my life. I would need a complex regimen of medications, regular monitoring, and significant lifestyle changes. It wasn't until after the procedure, when I was settled in a recovery room, that I finally called Rachel. I had been in the hospital for nearly 6 hours, and I knew she would be worried if she tried to reach me and couldn't get through. Her reaction was exactly what I expected. Immediate concern followed by practical questions about my condition and treatment. "Mom, why didn't you call me immediately?" she asked. "I should have been there. I could have made sure you got the best care." I explained that everything had happened very quickly, and that I was in excellent hands at Swedish Medical Center. Dr. Chen had already outlined my treatment plan, and I was confident in her expertise. "Dr. Patricia Chen?" Rachel's voice carried a note of professional recognition. "I know her by reputation. She's very good. But Mom, cardiac care is my specialty. I should be managing your treatment, not some doctor you just met." I told Rachel that I appreciated her concern, but that I was comfortable with Dr. Chen and wanted to continue my care at Swedish. Rachel seemed slightly hurt by this decision, but she didn't argue. Instead, she said she would come to the hospital immediately to meet with Dr. Chen and review my treatment plan. When Rachel arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, she had transformed into her professional persona, Rachel Thompson Whitmore, cardiologist. She introduced herself to the nursing staff and requested to speak with Dr. Chen about my case. She reviewed my test results, asked detailed questions about my medications, and made suggestions about my ongoing care. I was proud to see my daughter in her element, demonstrating the expertise and knowledge that I had worked so hard to make possible. But I was also slightly uncomfortable with how quickly she had taken control of the situation. Dr. Chen was gracious and professional, but I could sense her mild irritation at having another physician second-guess her treatment decisions. After Rachel's consultation with Dr. Chen, she returned to my room with a serious expression. "Mom, your condition is more serious than I initially thought. You have significant coronary artery disease, and managing it properly is going to require careful monitoring and strict adherence to a medication regimen." Dr. Chen had already explained this to me, but Rachel continued as if she were delivering new information. "The medications you'll need to take are critical, not suggestions, but absolute requirements. Missing doses or taking them incorrectly could result in another heart attack, stroke, or even death." She pulled out a notebook and began writing down the names and dosages of my prescribed medications. Metoprolol for blood pressure regulation, atorvastatin for cholesterol management, and warfarin for blood thinning. "The warfarin is especially critical, Mom. It prevents blood clots that could cause a fatal heart attack or stroke." I told Rachel that Dr. Chen had already explained all of this to me and that I understood the importance of taking my medications exactly as prescribed. "I know you think you understand," Rachel said, "but managing cardiac medications isn't like taking vitamins. These drugs have serious interactions, precise timing requirements, and potential side effects that need to be monitored constantly. At your age, living alone, it would be very easy to make a mistake that could be fatal." That's when Rachel made her proposal. "I think you should come stay with me for a while, at least until we get your medications stabilized and make sure you're managing everything correctly." I was touched by her offer, but I explained that I was perfectly capable of managing my own medications and that I preferred to stay in my own apartment where I was comfortable and had my established routines. Rachel's expression became more serious. "Mom, this isn't about preference or comfort. This is about survival. You've just had a heart attack. Your life literally depends on taking these medications correctly and monitoring your symptoms carefully. What if you have another episode and you're alone in your apartment? What if you forget to take your warfarin and develop blood clots? What if you mix up your medications and take the wrong doses?" Her arguments were logical and seemed to come from genuine concern. She was a cardiologist after all, and she understood the risks better than I did. When she put it in terms of life and death, It was hard to argue with her reasoning. Besides, Rachel added, it would only be temporary, just until we establish a routine and make sure everything is working properly. I have a guest suite with its own bathroom and sitting area. You'd have complete privacy, but I'd be there if you needed help or if something went wrong. After 2 days in the hospital, I was released with a complex discharge plan that included follow-up appointments with Dr. Chen, cardiac rehabilitation sessions, and a strict medication schedule. The timing of my release coincided with Rachel's persistent arguments about the dangers of living alone, and I finally agreed to stay with her temporarily. Looking back, I realized that Rachel had been planning this moment from the time she first heard about my heart attack. She had used her medical knowledge and professional authority to create a sense of urgency and danger that made her offer seem like the only reasonable option. Moving into Rachel's guest suite felt strange from the beginning. The room was beautifully decorated but impersonal, like a high-end hotel room. Everything was expensive and perfect. The furniture, the bedding, the artwork on the walls. But it didn't feel like a place where someone actually lived. Rachel had prepared for my arrival with military precision. She had purchased a pill organizer with compartments for each day of the week and morning and evening doses. She had printed out medication schedules and taped them to the bathroom mirror. She had even arranged for a medical alert system to be installed, despite my protests that it was unnecessary. Mom, you have to understand that managing your condition requires systems and backup plans, she explained as she showed me how to use the pill organizer. This isn't just about remembering to take your pills. It's about taking the right pills at the right times and the right doses. One mistake could be fatal. For the first week, Rachel's attention to my medical care seemed genuinely caring and professional. She would check on me every morning before leaving for work, asking about my symptoms and reminding me about my medication schedule. She attended my follow-up appointment with Dr. Chen and took detailed notes about any changes to my treatment plan. She also began organizing my pills each Sunday evening, filling the weekly organizer with precise doses for each day. This way, you don't have to think about it, she explained. You just take what's in each compartment at the scheduled times. I appreciated her thoroughness, even though I felt perfectly capable of managing my own medications. But Rachel seemed so concerned about my well-being, and her professional knowledge made her arguments compelling. During those first weeks at Rachel's house, I also got to know my grandchildren better than I had in years. Emma, who was 15, was a thoughtful, studious girl who reminded me of Rachel at that age. She would often sit with me in the evenings, asking about my work and seeming genuinely interested in my stories about building the accounting business. James, who was 12, was more energetic and outgoing. He loved showing me his school projects and telling me about his soccer games and science experiments. Both children were polite and kind, and I enjoyed having the opportunity to spend regular time with them. But I also noticed things that made me uncomfortable. The children seemed to have very scheduled, structured lives with little spontaneity or unstructured playtime. Their conversations often focused on achievements, grades, and competitions rather than simple enjoyment or exploration. More concerning was how they talked about money and social status. Emma would mention classmates' families in terms of where they lived, what cars they drove, and what vacation destinations they visited. James would compare his possessions to those of his friends, always seeming aware of who had more or better things. These were children who had grown up with privilege and seemed to take it for granted in ways that made me sad. They had never experienced want or uncertainty, never learned to appreciate simple pleasures or to value things that couldn't be bought. I tried to share stories about my own childhood and about Rachel's early years, hoping to give them some perspective on different ways of living. But they listened politely without seeming to connect emotionally with experiences so different from their own. Rachel's lifestyle during this period also became more apparent to me. Her house was beautiful but felt more like a showplace than a home. Every room was perfectly decorated and organized, but there were few signs of actual family life. No clutter, no personal projects, no evidence of hobbies or relaxation. Rachel herself seemed to be constantly busy with work, social obligations, and the children's activities. She attended charity events, served on medical boards, and maintained a social calendar that kept her out most evenings. When she was home, she spent much of her time on her phone or laptop, managing her practice, and staying connected to her professional network. I began to wonder if Rachel's offer to have me stay with her was motivated by more than just concern for my health. Having me there meant she had built-in childcare and household supervision during her busy schedule. I found myself helping Emma with homework, driving James to soccer practice, and managing various household tasks that Rachel didn't have time for. Not that I minded helping with these things. I enjoyed spending time with my grandchildren and contributing to the household, but I began to suspect that Rachel's insistence on my staying there had as much to do with her own convenience as with my medical needs. 3 weeks into my stay, I had my first real indication that something was wrong with my medication management. I had been feeling unusually tired and had noticed some shortness of breath that seemed inconsistent with my recovery progress. When I mentioned these symptoms to Dr. Chen during a follow-up appointment, she was concerned enough to order additional blood work. The results showed that my blood levels of warfarin, the critical blood-thinning medication, were much lower than they should have been. Dr. Chen was puzzled because the levels suggested I was either not taking the medication regularly or was taking reduced doses. "Mrs. Thompson, are you taking your warfarin exactly as prescribed?" Dr. Chen asked. "Every day at the same time?" Quote, ... I assured her that I was following the medication schedule precisely, taking whatever pills Rachel had organized in my weekly dispenser. Dr. Chen frowned and made notes in my chart. "We may need to adjust your dosage," she said. "But it's unusual for levels to be this low if you're taking the medication as prescribed. Are you sure you haven't missed any doses or taken less than the full amount?" I was certain that I had been taking my medications exactly as organized, but Dr. Chen's concern made me start paying closer attention to what was actually in my pill organizer each day. That's when I began to notice small inconsistencies. The warfarin tablets were supposed to be light blue, but sometimes the pills in my organizer looked slightly different, maybe a little more white than blue, or a slightly different shape. When I mentioned this to Rachel, she explained that pharmacies sometimes receive medications from different manufacturers, and that the pills might look slightly different while containing the same active ingredients. "The important thing is that you're taking them consistently," she said. "Don't worry about minor variations in appearance. What matters is maintaining the routine." But I continued to feel concerned about my symptoms and the blood test results. I had spent decades managing complex financial details, and I had learned to pay attention when numbers didn't add up correctly. So I decided to start paying much closer attention to my medications. Without telling Rachel, I began taking photos of my pill organizer each morning and evening with my phone, documenting exactly what pills were there before I took my scheduled doses. I also started keeping the empty bottles from my prescriptions so I could compare the pills in my organizer to the original medications. Within a week, I had clear evidence that something was wrong. The photos showed that pills were sometimes missing from my organizer, and sometimes the pills that were there didn't match the original prescriptions. Most alarming, the warfarin tablets in my organizer were definitely not the same as the ones Dr. Chen had originally prescribed. They were close in color and size, but they were clearly different medications. That's when the horrible realization began to form in my mind. Someone was tampering with my medications. Someone was removing the critical blood-thinning medication that kept me alive and replacing it with something else. And the only person with access to my pill organizer was Rachel. My own daughter, the cardiologist who had insisted I stay with her for my own safety, was systematically sabotaging the medications that prevented me from having another heart attack. The woman I had sacrificed everything to educate and support was using her medical knowledge to slowly kill me. But why? What could Rachel possibly gain from my death that would be worth committing murder? The answer, of course, was obvious. Rachel believed she would inherit my modest savings and apartment when I died. In her mind, she was looking at maybe $200,000. Not a fortune, but enough to help with her financial stress after the divorce. What Rachel didn't know was that she was risking a murder charge for an inheritance that was a fraction of what she could have received if she had simply waited and treated me with basic human decency. More than that, she was about to discover that the frail, dependent mother she thought she was manipulating was actually far more capable and dangerous than she had ever imagined. Because while Rachel had been busy removing my medications and planning my death, I had been busy planning something else entirely. And unlike Rachel's plan, mine was going to work exactly as intended. Once I had documented clear evidence of the medication tampering, I faced the most difficult decision of my life. How to confront a daughter who is systematically trying to kill me. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an accident. This was premeditated murder disguised as medical care. And the person committing this crime was someone I had loved unconditionally for 47 years. My first instinct was to call the police immediately. I had photographic evidence, blood test results that supported my claims, and a clear pattern of medication substitution that any investigator could verify. But something held me back from making that call. Maybe it was the desperate hope that there was some other explanation. Maybe it was the fear that accusing my own daughter of attempted murder would destroy whatever relationship we had left. Or maybe it was the recognition that I needed to be absolutely certain before taking such a devastating step. So instead of calling the police, I decided to test my theory more thoroughly. I needed to catch Rachel in the act, to eliminate any possibility that I was mistaken about what was happening. That Sunday evening, I watched Rachel organize my pills for the upcoming week with new eyes. She went through the ritual with her usual efficiency, carefully placing each medication in the appropriate compartment of the weekly organizer. I noticed that she handled the warfarin bottles differently from the other medications, holding them slightly longer and checking the labels more carefully. After she finished and left the room, I immediately photographed the contents of each compartment, paying special attention to the warfarin tablets. Then I took one of the pills from Monday's evening dose and compared it to the original prescription bottle I had hidden in my suitcase. The difference was unmistakable. The pill in the organizer was definitely not the same medication Dr. Chen had prescribed, but I wanted to see exactly what Rachel was substituting for my life-saving medication. So I took the suspicious pill to a pharmacy across town and asked the pharmacist to identify it for me. "This appears to be a generic acetaminophen tablet," the pharmacist told me after examining the pill under a magnifying glass. "Basic pain reliever, essentially Tylenol. Completely harmless, but it has no cardiac benefits whatsoever." Quote, ... So Rachel wasn't just removing my blood thinner. She was replacing it with harmless pain medication to maintain the illusion that I was taking my prescribed drugs. This level of calculation and deception made her actions even more chilling. Armed with this information, I decided to confront Rachel directly, but carefully. I wanted to see how she would react when questioned about the medications, whether she would admit to what she was doing, or try to gaslight me into thinking I was confused or mistaken. The next morning, after Rachel had left for work, I called her office and asked to speak with her about my medication concerns. "Of course, Mom. What's wrong?" Rachel's voice carried the professional concern she used with patients. "I've been having some unusual symptoms," I told her, "and I'm wondering if there might be a problem with my medications. Some of the pills look different from what Dr. Chen originally prescribed." There was a brief pause before Rachel responded. "Mom, as I explained before, pharmacies often receive medications from different manufacturers. The pills might look slightly different, but they contain the same active ingredients. Are you taking them exactly as I organized them?" "Yes, but I'm concerned that they might not be the right medications. Maybe I should take them to a pharmacist to verify." Rachel's tone shifted subtly, becoming more authoritative. "Mom, that's really not necessary. I'm a cardiologist. I know what these medications look like and how they work. You're just experiencing normal anxiety after a heart attack. Many patients become obsessive about their medications." The condescending way she dismissed my concerns was telling. She wasn't addressing the specific issue I had raised. Instead, she was suggesting that my worries were a symptom of psychological instability. "I still think I should double-check with Dr. Chen," I persisted. "Maybe she could look at the pills and confirm they're correct." Now Rachel's voice carried a note of irritation. "Mom, you can't keep running to Dr. Chen every time you have a minor concern. You need to trust my professional judgment. I'm managing your care now, and constantly second-guessing my decisions isn't helpful for your recovery." This response was particularly revealing. Rachel was positioning herself as my primary physician, despite the fact that Dr. Chen was officially my cardiologist and had never transferred my care to Rachel. She was also suggesting that questioning her decisions was somehow harmful to my health. "But Rachel," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "these medications are critical for preventing another heart attack. If there's any chance they're not correct, shouldn't we verify that?" "Mom, Rachel's voice became sharp. You're becoming paranoid about your medications. This kind of obsessive behavior is common in elderly patients, especially after a cardiac event. If you keep this up, we might need to consider having Dr. Chen evaluate you for anxiety or depression. The threat was subtle but clear. If I continued to question the medications, Rachel would suggest that I was mentally unstable and needed psychiatric intervention. As a respected cardiologist, her professional opinion would carry significant weight with other physicians. I ended the conversation without pushing further, but Rachel's response had confirmed my worst fears. She wasn't making innocent mistakes with my medications. She was deliberately manipulating them and was prepared to gaslight me into silence if I questioned her actions. That evening, Rachel came home from work with a new bottle of pills. I spoke with your pharmacy, she announced, and picked up a fresh supply of your warfarin. The pharmacist confirmed that different manufacturers sometimes produce pills that look slightly different, but the medication is exactly the same. She opened the bottle and showed me the contents. Pills that looked identical to the original prescription Dr. Chen had given me. See? These are your actual warfarin tablets. I'm going to reorganize your weekly dispenser with these new pills to eliminate any confusion. I watched as Rachel replaced all the warfarin pills in my organizer with the new tablets. They were definitely the correct medication, the right color, shape, and markings. For a moment, I wondered if I had been wrong about everything. But that night, I photographed the contents of my pill organizer again, focusing on the warfarin tablets Rachel had just placed there. The next morning, I took my scheduled medications and photographed the organizer again to document what remained. By Tuesday evening, the warfarin tablet in my organizer had been replaced again. The correct pill Rachel had placed there was gone, and in its place was another acetaminophen tablet disguised as heart medication. This pattern continued throughout the week. Every few days, Rachel would replace the fake pills with real ones, creating the appearance that my medications were correct. But within hours, the real medications would disappear again, replaced with harmless substitutes. The sophistication of this system was terrifying. Rachel was maintaining plausible deniability by periodically placing correct medications in my organizer, ensuring that if anyone checked, including me, they would sometimes find the right pills. But she was also ensuring that I rarely, if ever, actually received the life-saving blood thinner that prevented fatal blood clots. During this time, I began experiencing the symptoms of warfarin withdrawal. My legs became swollen and painful. I developed chest tightness and shortness of breath. I felt dizzy and disoriented, especially when standing up quickly. These were all signs that my blood was becoming dangerously thick due to lack of proper medication. When I mentioned these symptoms to Rachel, her response was both predictable and chilling. These symptoms are normal during cardiac recovery, she explained with professional authority. Your body is adjusting to the medications and the stress of your heart attack. The important thing is to stay calm and not overreact to every minor discomfort. She recommended that I reduce my physical activity and spend more time resting. You're pushing yourself too hard, Mom. Your body needs time to heal. What Rachel was really doing was ensuring that I would be less active and therefore less likely to seek outside medical attention. She wanted me weak, isolated, and dependent on her interpretation of my symptoms. But Rachel's most disturbing behavior emerged when I suggested that I was feeling well enough to return to my own apartment. Absolutely not, she said firmly. Mom, you've only been here a month. Your condition is still unstable and you're having ongoing symptoms. Moving back to your apartment would be incredibly dangerous. I protested that I felt capable of managing my own care and that I missed the independence of my own home. Mom, this isn't about what you want or what you miss. This is about medical necessity. As your daughter and as a cardiologist, I can't allow you to put yourself at risk. The phrase, I can't allow you, was particularly telling. Rachel was no longer positioning herself as a concerned daughter offering help. She was asserting authority over my decisions and my life. When I mentioned that I wanted to schedule a follow-up appointment with Dr. Chen to discuss my ongoing symptoms, Rachel's response was swift and controlling. That's not necessary right now. I'm monitoring your condition closely, and I can adjust your medications as needed. Dr. Chen is busy with more critical cases, and we shouldn't bother her with routine follow-up care. Rachel was systematically isolating me from outside medical care. while maintaining the appearance of providing professional oversight. She was using her medical credentials to justify controlling every aspect of my healthcare, while secretly sabotaging the very treatments that kept me alive. The psychological manipulation was just as sophisticated as the medical deception. Rachel would alternate between expressing concern for my well-being and suggesting that I was becoming mentally unstable. "Mom, I'm worried about your cognitive function," she said one evening after I had questioned why I felt so tired all the time. "Memory problems and confusion are common in elderly patients after cardiac events. You might not be remembering things as clearly as you think." She began documenting what she called my episodes of confusion, keeping a notebook where she recorded times when I forgot minor details or seemed disoriented. This documentation could later be used to support claims that I was mentally incompetent and needed guardianship. Rachel also began making subtle changes to my environment that were designed to increase my sense of helplessness and dependency. She moved my belongings around in the guest room, claiming she was organizing things for my convenience. She changed the passwords on the television and internet, saying it was for security purposes. She began screening my phone calls, telling callers that I was resting or not feeling well enough to talk. These changes were small individually, but collectively they created an environment where I had less and less control over my own life and less access to the outside world. The most disturbing example of Rachel's manipulation came when I received a call from Harrison Henderson, my former business partner, who was concerned because I hadn't responded to several emails about year-end financial reports. When I asked Rachel if any mail or messages had come for me, she said there had been a few business things, but that she had told the callers I was recovering from a serious medical condition and couldn't be bothered with work matters. "Mom, you need to focus on your health right now, not business concerns. These people can wait until you're feeling better." But I explained that the year-end reports were time-sensitive and that I needed to respond to Harrison's inquiries. Rachel's reaction was swift and calculating. "Mom, if you're feeling pressured to work while you're recovering from a heart attack, maybe these business relationships aren't healthy for you. This kind of stress could trigger another cardiac event." She suggested that I might need to step back from my business responsibilities permanently. "At your age, after a serious medical event, maybe it's time to retire completely and let other people handle these matters." What Rachel was really suggesting was that I should abandon the business that represented the majority of my wealth and financial independence. She wanted me to become completely dependent on her for all aspects of my life, medical, financial, and social. But the most revealing moment came when Rachel's children, Emma and James, mentioned that they had heard their mother talking on the phone about grandmother's condition and long-term care planning. "Mom said you might need to go to a special place where they can take better care of you," 12-year-old James told me innocently. "She said your heart makes it hard for you to remember things and take care of yourself." This conversation revealed that Rachel was already laying the groundwork for having me declared incompetent and placed in a care facility. She was creating a narrative where my supposed cognitive decline and medical instability made it dangerous for me to live independently. The genius of Rachel's plan was its appearance of medical legitimacy. To outside observers, she was a devoted daughter and qualified physician, providing care for her aging mother who had suffered a serious heart attack. My symptoms, the fatigue, confusion, and physical weakness, could easily be attributed to my cardiac condition rather than medication sabotage. If I died suddenly of a heart attack, it would appear to be a tragic but natural progression of my existing medical condition. If I survived but became increasingly incapacitated, Rachel could justify taking control of my finances and placing me in institutional care. Either way, Rachel would gain access to what she believed was my modest inheritance, while appearing to be a compassionate daughter dealing with a difficult situation. But what Rachel didn't realize was that her systematic campaign of medical and psychological abuse was being meticulously documented by someone with decades of experience in financial investigation and record-keeping. Every medication substitution, every manipulative conversation, every attempt to isolate me from outside contact was being recorded, photographed, and preserved. I was building a case that would not only expose Rachel's attempted murder, but would also demonstrate the calculated, premeditated nature of her crimes. More importantly, Rachel's actions were helping me understand exactly who she had become. Not just someone capable of murder, but someone who would use every tool at her disposal, including her medical training and parental authority, to manipulate and control another person for financial gain. This knowledge was devastating, but it was also liberating. I no longer had to hope that my daughter might change or that our relationship might be salvaged. I could see clearly that Rachel viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed or an asset to be controlled. And once I understood that truth, I could begin planning my response with the same calculated precision that Rachel was using to plan my destruction. The difference was that my plan was going to work exactly as intended, and Rachel was going to discover that underestimating her mother was the biggest mistake she had ever made. Once I had documented clear evidence of the medication tampering, I faced the most difficult decision of my life: how to confront a daughter who was systematically trying to kill me. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an accident. This was premeditated murder disguised as medical care. And the person committing this crime was someone I had loved unconditionally for 47 years. My first instinct was to call the police immediately. I had photographic evidence, blood test results that supported my claims, and a clear pattern of medication substitution that any investigator could verify. But something held me back from making that call. Maybe it was the desperate hope that there was some other explanation. Maybe it was the fear that accusing my own daughter of attempted murder would destroy whatever relationship we had left. Or maybe it was the recognition that I needed to be absolutely certain before taking such a devastating step. So instead of calling the police, I decided to test my theory more thoroughly. I needed to catch Rachel in the act, to eliminate any possibility that I was mistaken about what was happening. That Sunday evening, I watched Rachel organize my pills for the upcoming week with new eyes. She went through the ritual with her usual efficiency, carefully placing each medication in the appropriate compartment of the weekly organizer. I noticed that she handled the warfarin bottles differently from the other medications, holding them slightly longer and checking the labels more carefully. After she finished and left the room, I immediately photographed the contents of each compartment, paying special attention to the warfarin tablets. Then I took one of the pills from Monday's evening dose and compared it to the original prescription bottle I had hidden in my suitcase. The difference was unmistakable. The pill in the organizer was definitely not the same medication Dr. Chen had prescribed. But I wanted to see exactly what Rachel was substituting for my life-saving medication. So I took the suspicious pill to a pharmacy across town and asked the pharmacist to identify it for me. This appears to be a generic acetaminophen tablet, the pharmacist told me after examining the pill under a magnifying glass. Basic pain reliever, essentially Tylenol. Completely harmless, but it has no cardiac benefits whatsoever. Quote, ... So Rachel wasn't just removing my blood thinner. She was replacing it with harmless pain medication to maintain the illusion that I was taking my prescribed drugs. This level of calculation and deception made her actions even more chilling. Armed with this information, I decided to confront Rachel directly, but carefully. I wanted to see how she would react when questioned about the medications, whether she would admit to what she was doing or try to gaslight me into thinking I was confused or mistaken. The next morning, after Rachel had left for work, I called her office and asked to speak with her about my medication concerns. Of course, Mom. What's wrong? Rachel's voice carried the professional concern she used with patients. I've been having some unusual symptoms, I told her, and I'm wondering if there might be a problem with my medications. Some of the pills look different from what Dr. Chen originally prescribed. There was a brief pause before Rachel responded. Mom, as I explained before, pharmacies often receive medications from different manufacturers. The pills might look slightly different, but they contain the same active ingredients. Are you taking them exactly as I organized them? Yes, but I'm concerned that they might not be the right medications. Maybe I should take them to a pharmacist to verify. Rachel's tone shifted subtly, becoming more authoritative. Mom, that's really not necessary. I'm a cardiologist. I know what these medications look like and how they work. You're just experiencing normal anxiety after a heart attack. Many patients become obsessive about their medications. The condescending way she dismissed my concerns was telling. She wasn't addressing the specific issue I had raised. Instead, she was suggesting that my worries were a symptom of psychological instability. I still think I should double-check with Dr. Chen, I persisted. Maybe she could look at the pills and confirm they're correct. Now, Rachel's voice carried a note of irritation. Mom, you can't keep running to Dr. Chen every time you have a minor concern. You need to trust my professional judgment. I'm managing your care now, and constantly second-guessing my decisions isn't helpful for your recovery. This response was particularly revealing. Rachel was positioning herself as my primary physician, despite the fact that Dr. Chen was officially my cardiologist and had never transferred my care to Rachel. She was also suggesting that questioning her decisions was somehow harmful to my health. But Rachel, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, these medications are critical for preventing another heart attack. If there's any chance they're not correct, shouldn't we verify that? Mom, Rachel's voice became sharp, you're becoming paranoid about your medications. This kind of obsessive behavior is common in elderly patients, especially after a cardiac event. If you keep this up, we might need to consider having Dr. Chen evaluate you for anxiety or depression. The threat was subtle but clear. If I continued to question the medications, Rachel would suggest that I was mentally unstable and needed psychiatric intervention. As a respected cardiologist, her professional opinion would carry significant weight with other physicians. I ended the conversation without pushing further, but Rachel's response had confirmed my worst fears. She wasn't making innocent mistakes with my medications. She was deliberately manipulating them and was prepared to gaslight me into silence if I questioned her actions. That evening, Rachel came home from work with a new bottle of pills. I spoke with your pharmacy, she announced, and picked up a fresh supply of your warfarin. The pharmacist confirmed that different manufacturers sometimes produce pills that look slightly different, but the medication is exactly the same. She opened the bottle and showed me the contents, pills that looked identical to the original prescription Dr. Chen had given me. See? These are your actual warfarin tablets. I'm going to reorganize your weekly dispenser with these new pills to eliminate any confusion. I watched as Rachel replaced all the warfarin pills in my organizer with the new tablets. They were definitely the correct medication, the right color, shape, and markings. For a moment, I wondered if I had been wrong about everything. But that night, I photographed the contents of my pill organizer again, focusing on the warfarin tablets Rachel had just placed there. The next morning, I took my scheduled medications and photographed the organizer again to document what remained. By Tuesday evening, the warfarin tablet in my organizer had been replaced again. The correct pill Rachel had placed there was gone, and in its place was another acetaminophen tablet disguised as heart medication. This pattern continued throughout the week. Every few days, Rachel would replace the fake pills with real ones, creating the appearance that my medications were correct. But within hours, the real medications would disappear again, replaced with harmless substitutes. The sophistication of this system was terrifying. Rachel was maintaining plausible deniability by periodically placing correct medications in my organizer, ensuring that if anyone checked, including me, they would sometimes find the right pills. But she was also ensuring that I rarely, if ever, actually received the life-saving blood thinner that prevented fatal blood clots. During this time, I began experiencing the symptoms of warfarin withdrawal. My legs became swollen and painful. I developed chest tightness and shortness of breath. I felt dizzy and disoriented, especially when standing up quickly. These were all signs that my blood was becoming dangerously thick due to lack of proper medication. When I mentioned these symptoms to Rachel, her response was both predictable and chilling. These symptoms are normal during cardiac recovery, she explained with professional authority. Your body is adjusting to the medications and the stress of your heart attack. The important thing is to stay calm and not overreact to every minor discomfort. She recommended that I reduce my physical activity and spend more time resting. You're pushing yourself too hard, Mom. Your body needs time to heal. What Rachel was really doing was ensuring that I would be less active and therefore less likely to seek outside medical attention. She wanted me weak, isolated, and dependent on her interpretation of my symptoms. But Rachel's most disturbing behavior emerged when I suggested that I was feeling well enough to return to my own apartment. Absolutely not, she said firmly. Mom, you've only been here a month. Your condition is still unstable, and you're having ongoing symptoms. Moving back to your apartment would be incredibly dangerous. I protested that I felt capable of managing my own care and that I missed the independence of my own home. Mom, this isn't about what you want or what you miss. This is about medical necessity. As your daughter and as a cardiologist, I can't allow you to put yourself at risk. The phrase, "I can't allow you," was particularly telling. Rachel was no longer positioning herself as a concerned daughter offering help. She was asserting authority over my decisions and my life. When I mentioned that I wanted to schedule a follow-up appointment with Dr. Chen to discuss my ongoing symptoms, Rachel's response was swift and controlling. "That's not necessary right now. I'm monitoring your condition closely, and I can adjust your medications as needed. Dr. Chen is busy with more critical cases, and we shouldn't bother her with routine follow-up care." Rachel was systematically isolating me from outside medical care while maintaining the appearance of providing professional oversight. She was using her medical credentials to justify controlling every aspect of my healthcare while secretly sabotaging the very treatments that kept me alive. The psychological manipulation was just as sophisticated as the medical deception. Rachel would alternate between expressing concern for my well-being and suggesting that I was becoming mentally unstable. "Mom, I'm worried about your cognitive function," she said one evening after I'd questioned why I felt so tired all the time. "Memory problems and confusion are common in elderly patients after cardiac events. You might not be remembering things as clearly as you think." She began documenting what she called my episodes of confusion, keeping a notebook where she recorded times when I forgot minor details or seemed disoriented. This documentation could later be used to support claims that I was mentally incompetent and needed guardianship. Rachel also began making subtle changes to my environment that were designed to increase my sense of helplessness and dependency. She moved my belongings around in the guest room, claiming she was organizing things for my convenience. She changed the passwords on the television and internet, saying it was for, quote, security purposes. She began screening my phone calls, telling callers that I was resting or not feeling well enough to talk. These changes were small individually, but collectively they created an environment where I had less and less control over my own life and less access to the outside world. The most disturbing example of Rachel's manipulation came when I received a call from Harrison Henderson, my former business partner, who was concerned because I hadn't responded to several emails about year-end financial reports. When I asked Rachel if any mail or messages had come for me, she said there had been a few business things, but that she had told the callers I was recovering from a serious medical condition and couldn't be bothered with work matters. "Mom, you need to focus on your health right now, not business concerns. These people can wait until you're feeling better." But I explained that the year-end reports were time-sensitive and that I needed to respond to Harrison's inquiries. Rachel's reaction was swift and calculating. "Mom, if you're feeling pressured to work while you're recovering from a heart attack, maybe these business relationships aren't healthy for you. This kind of stress could trigger another cardiac event." She suggested that I might need to step back from my business responsibilities permanently. "At your age, after a serious medical event, maybe it's time to retire completely and let other people handle these matters." What Rachel was really suggesting was that I should abandon the business that represented the majority of my wealth and financial independence. She wanted me to become completely dependent on her for all aspects of my life, medical, financial, and social. But the most revealing moment came when Rachel's children, Emma and James, mentioned that they had heard their mother talking on the phone about grandmother's condition and long-term care planning. "Mom said you might need to go to a special place where they can take better care of you," 12-year-old James told me innocently. "She said your heart makes it hard for you to remember things and take care of yourself." This conversation revealed that Rachel was already laying the groundwork for having me declared incompetent and placed in a care facility. She was creating a narrative where my supposed cognitive decline and medical instability made it dangerous for me to live independently. The genius of Rachel's plan was its appearance of medical legitimacy. To outside observers, she was a devoted daughter and qualified physician providing care for her aging mother who had suffered a serious heart attack. My symptoms, the fatigue, confusion, and physical weakness, could easily be attributed to my cardiac condition rather than medication sabotage. If I died suddenly of a heart attack, it would appear to be a tragic but natural progression of my existing medical condition. If I survived but became increasingly incapacitated, Rachel could justify taking control of my finances and placing me in institutional care. Either way, Rachel would gain access to what she believed was my modest inheritance, while appearing to be a compassionate daughter dealing with a difficult situation. But what Rachel didn't realize was that her systematic campaign of medical and psychological abuse was being meticulously documented by someone with decades of experience in financial investigation and record-keeping. Every medication substitution, every manipulative conversation, every attempt to isolate me from outside contact was being recorded, photographed, and preserved. I was building a case that would not only expose Rachel's attempted murder, but would also demonstrate the calculated, premeditated nature of her crimes. More importantly, Rachel's actions were helping me understand exactly who she had become, not just someone capable of murder, but someone who would use every tool at her disposal, including her medical training and parental authority, to manipulate and control another person for financial gain. This knowledge was devastating, but it was also liberating. I no longer had to hope that my daughter might change, or that our relationship might be salvaged. I could see clearly that Rachel viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed, or an asset to be controlled. And once I understood that truth, I could begin planning my response with the same calculated precision that Rachel was using to plan my destruction. The difference was that my plan was going to work exactly as intended, and Rachel was going to discover that underestimating her mother was the biggest mistake she had ever made. The morning after Rachel's devastating confession, I woke up knowing that my life was about to change completely. For 6 weeks, I had been playing the role of the helpless, confused, elderly woman that Rachel needed me to be. But that performance was about to end, and Rachel was going to discover that the mother she thought she could manipulate and control was actually far more powerful than she had ever imagined. But first, I needed to understand exactly what Rachel had done when she contacted Henderson and Associates. Her interference with my business relationships wasn't just a betrayal. It was a critical mistake that would expose her fraud to people who had the resources and motivation to take action against her. I waited until Rachel left for work, then called Harrison Henderson from the phone in the guest room. Harrison had been my business partner and friend for over 3 decades, and he knew me better than almost anyone. If Rachel had told him that I was suffering from dementia and cognitive decline, he would immediately recognize that something was wrong. "Eleanor." Harrison's voice carried obvious relief when he heard from me. "Thank God you called. I've been worried sick about you since I spoke with your daughter last week." My heart sank as I realized that Rachel had indeed contacted him. "Harrison, what exactly did Rachel tell you?" "She called my office and said that you had suffered a serious heart attack followed by significant cognitive decline. She claimed that you were no longer capable of handling business responsibilities and that all future communications should go through her as your medical guardian." The phrase medical guardian was particularly telling. Rachel had misrepresented her authority, suggesting that she already had legal control over my affairs when no such guardianship had been established. "She also said that you would need to retire immediately and that we should begin transitioning your clients to other accountants," Harrison continued. "Eleanor, I have to tell you, none of this sounded like the woman I've worked with for 32 years. You've always been the sharpest, most detail-oriented person I know." Harrison's assessment of my cognitive abilities was exactly what I had hoped to hear. Someone who had worked closely with me for decades would immediately recognize that claims about my mental incompetence were false. "Harrison, I need to tell you something very important," I said. "Everything Rachel told you was a lie. I don't have dementia or cognitive decline. My heart attack was serious, but my mental function is completely normal." There was a long pause before Harrison responded. "Eleanor, are you saying that your daughter deliberately lied about your condition?" "I'm saying that Rachel has been systematically trying to isolate me from my business relationships and personal independence so that she can gain control of my assets. She's been tampering with my medications and creating false documentation about my mental state." Another pause. "Eleanor, these are very serious accusations. Are you certain about what you're telling me?" "Harrison, you've known me for 3 decades. You've seen my work, my attention to detail, my ability to manage complex financial matters. Do I sound confused or incompetent to you right now?" "No," Harrison said immediately. "You sound exactly like the Eleanor Thompson I've always known. Sharp, articulate, and completely in control of your mental faculties. I felt a wave of relief knowing that at least one person who mattered would be able to verify my competence if Rachel tried to have me declared legally incompetent. Harrison, there's something else I need to tell you, and it's going to come as a shock. When Rachel contacted you, she thought she was interfering with a small part-time bookkeeping job. She has no idea about the true scope of Henderson and Associates or my ownership stake in the company. What do you mean? Harrison asked, though I could hear in his voice that he was beginning to understand. Rachel doesn't know that I own the company. She doesn't know about the client base, the annual revenue, or the value of the business. She thinks I've been working a modest part-time job for pocket money. Harrison's sharp intake of breath confirmed that he understood the implications. Eleanor, your daughter tried to interfere with the operations of a multi-million-dollar business based on false claims about your mental capacity. Do you realize the legal implications of what she's done? I'm beginning to, I said. But first, I need to understand exactly what damage she might have caused. Did she request any financial information about the company or my accounts? She asked for copies of your employment records and wanted to know about any outstanding financial obligations you might have to the company. She also suggested that we should consider whether you might have made any, quote, confused or impulsive financial decisions recently that might need to be reversed. This confirmed my worst fears. Rachel wasn't just trying to isolate me from my work. She was attempting to gain access to information about my business assets so she could challenge my financial decisions and potentially seize control of my ownership stake in the company. Harrison, I need you to do something very important. I need you to document every aspect of Rachel's contact with you, the dates, times, exact statements she made, and any requests for information. This documentation might be critical if I need to take legal action against her. Of course. But Eleanor, what are you going to do about this situation? If your daughter is really doing what you've described, you could be in serious danger. Harrison's concern was touching, but I realized he still didn't understand the full scope of my situation, or my ability to handle it. Harrison, I need to ask you a favor. I need you to contact our attorney, David Michaels, and ask him to prepare a comprehensive financial statement showing my ownership stake in Henderson and Associates, the company's assets and annual revenue, and the current market value of my holdings. Are you planning to liquidate your stake in the company? Harrison sounded concerned. No, nothing like that. But I want to have complete documentation of my financial position, in case I need to prove my competence and independence to legal authorities. Eleanor, can I ask you something? How much does your daughter think you're worth? This was the question that got to the heart of Rachel's miscalculation. She thinks I have maybe $50,000 in savings and an apartment worth about $150,000. She has no idea that my actual net worth is over $4 million. Harrison whistled softly. So she's planning to commit serious crimes for what she thinks is a $200,000 inheritance, while unknowingly destroying her chance at inheriting actual millions. Exactly. And Harrison, there's something else. I've been planning to update my will anyway, given the changes in my business ownership. Rachel's actions have helped me decide exactly how that new will should be structured. Quote, ... After ending my call with Harrison, I immediately contacted David Michaels, the attorney who had handled all my business legal matters for the past 15 years. David had helped structure my partnership with Harrison, had managed the legal aspects of my buyout of Harrison's shares, and had been instrumental in establishing the current ownership structure of Henderson and Associates. Mrs. Thompson, I was so sorry to hear about your heart attack, David said when his secretary connected my call. How are you feeling? I'm recovering well, thank you. But David, I'm calling about a legal matter that's become quite urgent. I need to schedule an appointment to discuss updating my will, and I may need your help with some other issues related to attempted fraud and elder abuse. David's tone became immediately serious. Mrs. Thompson, those are very serious matters. Can you give me a general idea of what's involved? I outlined the basic situation: Rachel's medication tampering, her false claims about my mental condition, her interference with my business relationships, and her plans to have me declared incompetent and placed in institutional care. Mrs. Thompson, if what you're describing is accurate, Your daughter may have committed multiple felonies including attempted murder, fraud, and elder abuse. Have you contacted law enforcement? Not yet. I want to have comprehensive documentation of everything that's happened before I involve the police. I also want to make sure my legal and financial affairs are completely in order. That's very wise. Mrs. Thompson, I have to ask, are you currently in a safe environment? If your daughter is really tampering with your medications, you could be in immediate danger. David's concern was appropriate, but I had already taken steps to protect myself. For the past week, I had been secretly disposing of the medications Rachel prepared for me and taking the correct doses from backup prescriptions I had obtained from Dr. Chen during a private consultation. I'm taking precautions to ensure my safety, I told David, but I need to move quickly to protect my legal and financial interests before Rachel can do any more damage. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I'd like to document everything you've told me and begin preparing the legal frameworks you'll need to protect yourself. That afternoon, I told Rachel that I had a routine follow-up appointment with Dr. Chen. This wasn't entirely a lie. I did need to see Dr. Chen to get official documentation of my cognitive competence, but my primary destination was David Michael's law office in downtown Seattle. David's office was located in a prestigious building overlooking Elliott Bay, reflecting the high-level corporate clientele he served. When I arrived, David immediately arranged for a court reporter to document my statement about Rachel's actions, ensuring that everything I said would be legally admissible if needed. Mrs. Thompson, before we discuss your daughter's actions, I want to review your current financial position so I understand exactly what assets we're trying to protect, David said. He pulled out a thick folder containing documentation of my business ownership, investment accounts, and property holdings. Seeing all my assets laid out in legal documents was both satisfying and sobering. It represented decades of careful work and strategic planning. Your current net worth, including your ownership of Henderson & Associates, your investment portfolio, and your real estate holdings, is approximately $4.7 million, David said. This includes the accounting firm, which alone is valued at over $3 million, your diversified stock portfolio worth $800,000, and your real estate investments totaling $600,000. The numbers were even higher than I had estimated. While I had been focused on surviving Rachel's attacks, my investments had continued to grow, and the accounting firm had become even more valuable. Mrs. Thompson, your daughter is attempting to defraud you of assets worth nearly $5 million. This isn't petty theft. This is major financial crime that could result in decades of prison time. David then walked me through the legal implications of Rachel's actions. Her medication tampering constituted attempted murder. Her false claims about my mental condition constituted fraud and elder abuse. Her interference with my business relationships constituted intentional interference with business operations. Her plans to obtain guardianship through false documentation constituted conspiracy and attempted theft. Each of these crimes carries serious penalties, David explained. But taken together, they demonstrate a pattern of premeditated criminal behavior that prosecutors take very seriously. David also explained how Rachel's medical credentials would actually work against her in legal proceedings. Physicians are held to higher standards of ethical behavior, especially regarding informed consent and patient welfare. The fact that your daughter is using her medical training to harm rather than help you will be viewed as particularly egregious by both the Medical Licensing Board and criminal courts. But the most important part of our meeting was establishing the legal frameworks that would protect me from Rachel's plans for guardianship and institutional care. Mrs. Thompson, we need to immediately establish clear documentation of your mental competence and your wishes regarding your own care, David said. I'm going to arrange for you to undergo comprehensive psychological and cognitive evaluations by independent medical professionals who specialize in elder care assessments. These evaluations would serve multiple purposes. They would provide objective evidence that I was mentally competent and capable of making my own decisions. They would refute any claims Rachel might make about my cognitive decline. And they would establish a legal record that I was acting voluntarily and with full understanding when I made decisions about my care and my finances. David also prepared immediate legal documents that would protect me from Rachel's guardianship plans. These included a revocable living trust that placed my assets under the control of independent trustees, advanced directives that specified my wishes for medical care, and power of attorney documents that designated David's law firm rather than Rachel as my legal representatives, if I ever became incapacitated. These documents will make it legally impossible for your daughter to gain control of your assets or your care decisions, even if she somehow convinced a court that you were mentally incompetent, David explained. But the most important document we prepared was my new will. After Rachel's betrayal and her plans to destroy my independence and steal my life's work, I had no intention of leaving her anything from my estate. David, I want my new will to reflect my current understanding of my daughter's character and her treatment of me, I said. I don't want her to inherit anything. David nodded. Mrs. Thompson, given what your daughter has done, I think that's completely appropriate. How would you like to structure your estate distribution? I had been thinking about this question for weeks. While Rachel had been planning to steal my modest inheritance, I had been planning how to distribute my actual wealth to people and causes that deserved it. I want to establish a foundation that provides educational scholarships for students from working-class families who want to pursue careers in business and accounting, I said. I want to fund opportunities for people who face the same challenges I faced as a young single mother trying to build a career. This foundation would be funded with the majority of my estate, ensuring that my life's work would continue to create opportunities for others rather than simply enriching someone who had proven herself unworthy of that legacy. I also want to leave substantial bequests to Harrison Henderson, who has been a true friend and mentor, and to several employees at the accounting firm who have contributed to its success over the years. David made notes as I outlined my wishes. What about your grandchildren, Emma and James? Do you want to make any provisions for their education or future? This was a difficult question. Emma and James were innocent of their mother's crimes, but they were also being raised with values that I found troubling. They had been taught to measure people by their wealth and status, and they had been kept deliberately ignorant of my role in their family's financial security. I want to establish educational trusts for Emma and James that will pay for their college educations, but only if they choose to attend public universities and pursue fields that involve serving others rather than simply accumulating wealth, I decided. If they want to become teachers, social workers, engineers, or other professions that contribute to society, they'll have full financial support. If they want to follow in their mother's footsteps and pursue careers focused on status and money, they'll be on their own. This structure would give my grandchildren opportunities to develop better values than their mother had, while ensuring that my money wouldn't simply enable them to continue the cycle of privilege and entitlement that had corrupted Rachel. And Mrs. Thompson, what do you want to include in your will regarding your daughter specifically? David asked. I thought about this carefully. I could simply leave Rachel nothing without explanation. But I wanted her to understand exactly why she had forfeited her inheritance. I want the will to include a detailed explanation of Rachel's actions and the reasons she's been disinherited, I said. I want it to be clear that her betrayal cost her millions of dollars, and I want that message to be part of the legal record. David prepared a clause that would serve this purpose. To my daughter, Rachel Elizabeth Thompson Whitmore, you are receiving no inheritance from my estate due to your systematic attempts to defraud me, your tampering with my life-saving medications, your false claims about my mental competence, and your efforts to steal my assets through fraudulent guardianship proceedings. Your actions demonstrated complete disregard for my welfare and revealed a character unworthy of inheriting the results of my life's work. The millions of dollars you thought you could steal through your crimes will instead benefit people who understand the value of education, hard work, and ethical behavior. After completing the legal documents, David arranged for me to undergo the medical evaluations that would definitively establish my mental competence. Dr. Sarah Walsh, a neuropsychologist who specialized in eldercare assessments, conducted comprehensive cognitive testing that evaluated my memory, reasoning ability, decision-making capacity, and overall mental function. The results were exactly what I expected. Dr. Walsh found that my cognitive function was well above average for my age group, and that I showed no signs of dementia, confusion, or impaired decision-making ability. Her written report concluded that I was fully competent to make decisions about my own medical care, living situation, and financial affairs. Dr. Walsh also reviewed the medical documentation that Rachel had created about my supposed cognitive decline. After examining Rachel's notes and comparing them to her own testing results, Dr. Walsh concluded that Rachel's documentation was inconsistent with observable evidence, and appears to have been fabricated to support false claims about the patient's mental capacity. This professional assessment would make it impossible for Rachel to successfully claim that I was mentally incompetent, even if she somehow obtained legal representation and tried to pursue guardianship proceedings. With all the legal and medical documentation in place, I finally had everything I needed to protect myself from Rachel's schemes, and to ensure that she would face consequences for her crimes. But I wasn't ready to reveal my hand yet. I wanted Rachel to continue believing that her plan was working, that she was successfully manipulating a helpless elderly woman who had no idea what was happening to her. I wanted her to feel confident and secure in her control over the situation, because that confidence would make her confession even more devastating when it was eventually used against her in court. Most importantly, I wanted Rachel to understand that the modest inheritance she thought she was stealing through attempted murder was actually a multi-million-dollar fortune that she had forfeited through her own greed and cruelty. Because the look on Rachel's face when she finally realized what she had lost was going to be worth every moment of the careful planning that had made her destruction possible. And I was going to make sure that moment arrived very soon. With all my legal defenses in place and irrefutable evidence of Rachel's crimes documented, I was ready to execute the final phase of my plan. But I didn't want to simply expose Rachel's betrayal. I wanted her to experience the full consequences of underestimating someone who had spent decades building something from nothing. She was about to learn that the modest, helpless mother she thought she could manipulate was actually more powerful than she had ever imagined. The first step was to ensure that Rachel's crimes would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Working with David Michaels, I arranged to meet with Detective Maria Santos of the Seattle Police Department's Elder Abuse Unit. Detective Santos was a specialist in financial crimes against elderly victims, and she had extensive experience with cases involving family members who exploited their aging relatives. When I arrived at the police station on a gray December morning, Detective Santos immediately impressed me with her professionalism and thoroughness. She had reviewed the preliminary evidence David had provided, and she understood the serious nature of Rachel's crimes. "Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know that we take elder abuse cases very seriously, especially when they involve medical professionals who exploit their training to harm vulnerable people," Detective Santos said. "Based on what your attorney has shared with us, your daughter appears to have committed multiple felonies." I provided Detective Santos with the complete documentation of Rachel's actions, the photographs of tampered medications, the audio recording of her confession about guardianship plans, the fabricated medical records claiming cognitive decline, and the evidence of her interference with my business relationships. "This is one of the most comprehensive evidence packages I've seen in an elder abuse case," Detective Santos said after reviewing everything. "Your daughter made the mistake of targeting someone who was capable of documenting her crimes methodically." Detective Santos explained that Rachel would likely be charged with attempted murder for the medication tampering, fraud for the false medical documentation, elder abuse for the systematic manipulation and control, and conspiracy for her guardianship scheme. Given her medical license and the premeditated nature of her actions, she could face decades in prison if convicted. "We'll need to coordinate with the state medical board as well," Detective Santos added. "Dr. Thompson Whitmore's medical license will certainly be revoked, and she'll be barred from practicing medicine anywhere in the country." But Detective Santos also cautioned me about the investigation timeline. "Mrs. Thompson, these cases can take months to prosecute, and during that time, your daughter might realize she's under investigation and try to accelerate her plans against you. We need to ensure your immediate safety while we build the criminal case." This was where my legal preparations became critical. With David's help, I had already established legal barriers that would prevent Rachel from gaining control of my care or finances, even if she somehow managed to initiate guardianship proceedings before being arrested. "Detective Santos, I understand the timeline constraints, but I want Rachel to face justice for what she's done. I also want other potential victims to be protected from similar abuse by medical professionals who exploit their authority." Detective Santos nodded. "Mrs. Thompson, your case could set important precedents for prosecuting medical professionals who abuse their training and family relationships to exploit elderly victims. We're committed to pursuing this as aggressively as possible." While the criminal investigation was beginning, I also needed to address the immediate practical situation. I had been living in Rachel's house for nearly 2 months, pretending to be the confused, helpless woman she needed me to be. But maintaining that deception was becoming increasingly difficult, and it was time to reclaim my independence. I made arrangements to move back to my own apartment, but not before making sure that Rachel understood exactly what she had lost through her betrayal. I wanted her final memory of our relationship to be the moment she realized that her greed and cruelty had cost her millions of dollars. On a cold Wednesday morning in December, while Rachel was at work, I packed my belongings and prepared to leave her house for the last time. But before leaving, I placed an envelope on her dining room table, the same table where she had outlined her plans to have me declared incompetent and placed in institutional care. The envelope contained 3 documents: a copy of my new will showing the $4.7 million estate she had forfeited, a letter explaining exactly why she had been disinherited, and a notice that criminal charges were being filed against her. The letter was something I had crafted carefully, wanting to ensure that Rachel understood not just what she had lost, but why her actions had been so devastating. Rachel, by the time you read this, I will have moved back to my own apartment and resumed control of my life and my business affairs. You will also have received notice that criminal charges are being filed against you for attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. For 47 years, I sacrificed everything to give you opportunities I never had. I worked multiple jobs to pay for your education, sold my home to fund your medical school, and gave up my own dreams so that you could achieve yours. I did this because I loved you and believed that you would use those opportunities to become someone worthy of the investment I made in you. Instead, you became someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to what you felt entitled to inherit. You used your medical training I sacrificed to provide, to try to murder me slowly and systematically. You created false documentation about my mental state to justify stealing my independence and my assets. You planned to imprison me in an institution while draining my life's work to fund your lifestyle. What makes your betrayal even more devastating is how completely you underestimated both my intelligence and my resources. You thought you were manipulating a helpless elderly woman with a modest savings account. You had no idea that your little bookkeeping job mother had built a multi-million-dollar business and accumulated wealth far beyond what you thought possible. The inheritance you tried to steal through attempted murder was never the $200,000 you calculated. It was $4.7 million, enough to secure your children's education, pay off your mortgage, and provide financial security for the rest of your life. But through your greed and cruelty, you have forfeited every penny. My estate will now fund educational scholarships for working-class students who face the same challenges I faced as a young single mother. The money you thought you could steal will instead create opportunities for people who understand the value of hard work, ethical behavior, and gratitude for the sacrifices others make on their behalf. Your children will receive educational trusts that will support them if they choose careers focused on serving others rather than accumulating wealth and status. They will have the opportunity to develop better values than you demonstrated, but only if they earn that support through their choices and character. You will receive nothing, not because I stopped loving you. A mother's love doesn't die easily, but because your actions proved that you are incapable of appreciating or deserving what that love created. I hope that someday, when you are sitting in a prison cell and have lost your medical license, your social status, and your financial security, you will understand what it cost you to betray someone who would have given you everything. Eleanor. After leaving the letter, I took one final walk through Rachel's house, remembering the 6 weeks I had spent there pretending to be someone I wasn't. The guest room where I had documented her medication tampering, the kitchen where she had prepared fake pills while maintaining the pretense of caring for my health, the living room where she had outlined her plans to steal my life's work. All of it would soon be part of a criminal investigation. I collected the hidden cameras that David had helped me install in key locations throughout the house. These devices had captured additional evidence of Rachel's crimes, including footage of her tampering with my medications, and audio of her phone conversations with lawyers about guardianship proceedings. As I loaded my belongings into the taxi that would take me back to my own home, I felt a sense of liberation I hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since my heart attack, I was in complete control of my own life, surrounded by my own possessions, and free from the constant threat of someone trying to manipulate or control me. My apartment felt like a sanctuary after the oppressive atmosphere of Rachel's house. Everything was exactly as I had left it. My books, my photographs, my comfortable furniture that reflected my own tastes rather than someone else's designer preferences. Most importantly, my home office was waiting for me, filled with the business documents and financial records that represented decades of careful work and strategic planning. I immediately called Harrison Henderson to let him know that I was resuming my normal work responsibilities. "Eleanor, thank God you're safe," Harrison said when he heard my voice. "I've been worried about you ever since your daughter contacted us with those false claims." "Harrison, I'm back in my own home and back in control of my life," I told him. "Rachel's criminal schemes have been exposed, and she's going to face the full consequences of her actions." Harrison and I spent the next hour discussing the business developments I had missed during my involuntary absence from work. The accounting firm had continued to thrive, our client base had expanded, and several new opportunities had emerged that would further increase the company's value. "Eleanor, I have to say that your daughter made a serious mistake when she tried to interfere with our business operations," Harrison said. "She had no idea what she was dealing with." This was exactly the response I had hoped for. Rachel's interference with Henderson and Associates hadn't just failed. It had revealed her criminal behavior to people, with the resources and motivation to help prosecute her. Over the next few weeks, as the criminal investigation proceeded, I resumed my normal life with a sense of peace and satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. The constant stress of pretending to be helpless and confused was gone, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing that justice was finally being served. Detective Santos kept me informed about the progress of the case against Rachel. The evidence was overwhelming, and prosecutors were confident about securing convictions on all charges. Rachel's medical colleagues were cooperating with the investigation, and several of them had expressed shock and disgust at her abuse of her medical training. "Mrs. Thompson, your daughter's case is being watched closely by medical boards across the country," Detective Santos told me during one of our meetings. "Her conviction will send a strong message about the consequences of exploiting medical authority to harm family members." The most satisfying moment came when Detective Santos called to tell me that Rachel had been arrested at her medical office during the middle of a routine patient consultation. "Mrs. Thompson, your daughter seemed genuinely shocked that she was being charged with anything," Detective Santos said. "She kept insisting that she was just trying to provide appropriate care for her aging mother." Quote, Even when confronted with irrefutable evidence of her crimes, Rachel was still trying to maintain the fiction that her actions had been motivated by concern for my welfare rather than greed for my assets. But Rachel's shock turned to devastation when she finally read the letter I had left for her and realized the true scope of what she had lost. According to her defense attorney, who contacted David Michaels to explore plea bargain options, Rachel had suffered what could only be described as a complete psychological breakdown when she understood that she had forfeited a $4.7 million inheritance through her attempted murder scheme. "Mr. Michaels, my client is asking if there's any possibility that Mrs. Thompson might reconsider the terms of her will," the defense attorney said during one phone conversation. Dr. Thompson Whitmore claims she had no idea about her mother's actual financial situation, and that she never would have acted as she did if she had known about the inheritance. David's response was exactly what I had hoped to hear. "Counselor, your client attempted to murder Mrs. Thompson for what she thought was a modest inheritance. The fact that the actual inheritance was much larger doesn't make her crimes any less serious. It just makes her miscalculation more dramatic." The defense attorney's next question revealed just how completely Rachel had misunderstood the situation. "Mr. Michaels, would Mrs. Thompson consider a financial settlement in exchange for dropping the criminal charges?" David's response was swift and definitive. "Counselor, Mrs. Thompson is not interested in any financial settlement. Your client attempted to murder her for money, and Mrs. Thompson wants her to face the full legal consequences of that decision. The criminal charges will proceed to trial." What Rachel still didn't understand was that this had never been about money for me. I had more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. This was about justice, accountability, and ensuring that other potential victims would be protected from similar abuse. The trial, when it finally took place 8 months later, was a devastating showcase of Rachel's systematic betrayal and criminal behavior. The prosecution presented the evidence methodically. Photographs of tampered medications, audio recordings of Rachel's confessions, expert testimony about the life-threatening effects of withholding cardiac medications, and professional assessments debunking Rachel's false claims about my mental capacity. Rachel's defense team tried to argue that she had been acting out of genuine concern for my welfare, but the evidence of premeditation and financial motivation was overwhelming. The jury took less than 4 hours to find her guilty on all charges. When the judge sentenced Rachel to 15 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution for her attempted theft, I felt a sense of closure that had been building for months. Justice had finally been served, and Rachel would spend the next decade and a half thinking about the cost of betraying someone who had sacrificed everything for her success. But the most satisfying aspect of Rachel's punishment wasn't the prison sentence. It was the complete destruction of the life she had tried so hard to maintain. Her medical license was permanently revoked, ending the career I had sacrificed to make possible. Her reputation in Seattle's medical community was destroyed, ensuring that she would never again be able to exploit her professional authority. Most importantly, her children, Emma and James, finally learned the truth about their grandmother's role in their family's financial security and their mother's attempted crimes. The educational trusts I had established for them came with a requirement that they understand the ethical principles that had guided my life, and that they demonstrate those principles in their own choices. Emma, now 16, wrote me a letter 6 months after her mother's conviction. "Grandma Eleanor, I'm so sorry for how Mom treated you and for not understanding what you had done for our family. I want you to know that I'm changing my college plans. Instead of the private university Mom wanted me to attend, I'm applying to the University of Washington to study social work. I want to help people the way you helped us, even when we didn't deserve it." James, now 13, had also begun to understand the difference between earned success and inherited privilege. He started volunteering at local community centers and expressed interest in becoming a teacher rather than pursuing the high-status career his mother had planned for him. My grandchildren's transformation gave me hope that Rachel's legacy wouldn't be entirely negative. They were learning values that their mother had abandoned, and they were choosing paths that would contribute to society rather than simply accumulating wealth and status. Today, nearly 2 years after Rachel's conviction, I'm living peacefully in my own apartment, running my accounting firm, and overseeing the educational foundation that will ensure my life's work continues to create opportunities for deserving students. The foundation has already provided scholarships to 12 working-class students who are pursuing business and accounting degrees, and their success stories remind me why I chose to redirect my inheritance toward people who understand the value of hard work and ethical behavior. Rachel is serving her sentence at a minimum security federal facility, where she works in the prison library for 90 cents an hour, a dramatic change from her former lifestyle as a prestigious cardiologist. According to her prison counselor, she spends most of her time reading business and finance books, apparently trying to understand the wealth she forfeited through her crimes. I don't visit her, and I don't respond to the letters she occasionally sends asking for forgiveness and another chance. Some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome, and attempted murder by your own child is certainly one of them. But I do think about her sometimes, especially when I'm working with young people who face the same challenges I faced as a single mother trying to build a career. I wonder if Rachel might have developed different values, if I had been less willing to sacrifice my own needs for hers, if I had taught her to appreciate struggle rather than sheltering her from it. The answer, I suspect, is that some people are simply incapable of developing gratitude, empathy, or ethical behavior, regardless of how they're raised or what opportunities they're given. Rachel had every advantage I could provide, but she chose to use those advantages to exploit and harm the person who had made them possible. That choice revealed who she really was, and it cost her everything she thought she was entitled to inherit. The most important lesson I learned from this experience isn't about Rachel's failures. It's about my own strength and resilience. For months, I allowed myself to be seen as helpless and confused because I thought it would protect me from someone I still wanted to believe loved me. But I was never helpless. I was a successful businesswoman with decades of experience in strategic planning and problem solving. I had resources, connections, and skills that enabled me to document Rachel's crimes, protect my assets, and ensure that justice was served. The woman who had built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing was more than capable of outmaneuvering someone who mistook medical credentials for actual intelligence and assumed that age automatically meant vulnerability. Rachel learned, too late, that underestimating someone who has survived decades of challenges and built something meaningful from nothing is a very dangerous mistake. And I learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is allowing them to face the full consequences of their choices, even when that someone is your own child. Today, I'm 72 years old, in excellent health, and surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what they think they can take from me. My business continues to thrive, my foundation continues to create opportunities for deserving students, and my grandchildren are learning to make choices based on character rather than convenience. Rachel is exactly where she chose to be, facing the consequences of betraying someone who would have given her everything, and learning that some mistakes cost more than you can ever afford to pay. And me? I'm finally living the life I always deserved. Free, independent, and surrounded by people who understand that the greatest wealth isn't money. It's integrity, gratitude, and the knowledge that you've used your life to make the world a little better than you found it. That's a legacy worth building, and it's a legacy that no one can ever steal from you, no matter how hard they try.